Bishop Abel Tendekayi Muzorewa served as Prime Minister of Zimbabwe Rhodesia from the internal settlement to the Lancaster House Agreement in 1979. A Methodist bishop and nationalist leader, he held office for only a few months. Early life: Muzorewa was the eldest of a lay preacher's 8 children and was educated at the United Methodist School, Old Umtali. He was a schoolteacher at Moore between 1943 and 1947 before becoming a full-time lay preacher at Mtoko between 1947 and 1949. He then studied theology at Old Umtali Biblical College and was ordained as a minister at Umtali in August 1953. He was a pastor at Shaduku, near Rusape, from 1955 to 1958. He attended Central College in Fayette, Missouri, living with his wife and 3 sons in student prefabricated housing. His sons attended a segregated school. His youngest son Wesley and playmate Mark Elrod attempted to integrate the ice cream counter of the local drugstore, but were turned away. When Reverend Elrod took Reverend Muzorewa to visit Scarlett College in Nashville, Tennessee, they too were turned away from an eating facility, an incident he mentions in his autobiography. He obtained an M.A. from Scarlett College. In July 1963, Muzorewa became pastor of Old Umtali. A year later he was appointed National Director of the Christian Youth Movement and was seconded to the Christian Council. In 1966, he became Secretary of the Student Christian Movement. In 1968, at Masera in Botswana, he was consecrated as the United Methodist Church's Bishop of Rhodesia. United African National Council: in 1971 the British government struck a deal with Ian Smith that provided for a transition to majority rule in exchange for an end to sanctions against the government. Muzorewa joined an inexperienced cleric, the Reverend Canaan Banana, to form the United African National Council to oppose the settlement, under the acronym NIBMA. The proposed referendum was withdrawn and Muzorewa found himself a national leader and an international personality. The government opposition movement the Zimbabwe African National Union of Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole and the Zimbabwe African People's Union of Joshua Nkomoa both placed themselves under the UANC umbrella even though they had some doubts when Muzorewa founded a national party. After ZANU and ZAPU undertook guerrilla warfare, the UANC was the only legal black party, since it rejected violence. Internal settlement. On March 3, 1978, Muzorewa, Sithole and other non-exiled leaders signed an agreement at Governor's Lodge, Salisbury, which paved the way for the interim government, the leadership of which was an executive council made up of Muzorewa, Sithole and Jeremiah Chirau, along with Ian Smith. This executive council was to run the affairs of state prior to elections taking place. A new constitution was drafted reserving 10 seats in the Senate and 28 seats in the House of Assembly for the white minority, and a quarter of the cabinet positions. The constitution was approved in a nearly whites-only referendum that took place in January 1979. An overwhelming majority of 85% voted yes. Elections were held, and the UANC won. Josiah Gamede was the first president. Muzorewa became Prime Minister and the country's name was changed to Zimbabwe Rhodesia. However, the war that Smith hoped to stem as a result of the settlement continued unabated. Mugabe and Nkomo rejected the settlement, ending any realistic chance for Muzorewa to gain any international legitimacy. While ZANU and ZAPU could have taken part in the elections if they laid down their arms, they refused to do so. The internal settlement was also condemned by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 423 of 1978, which declared any settlement drafted under the illegal racist minority regime to be illegal and unacceptable. Lancaster House Agreement. The British government asked all parties to come to London for negotiations to find a lasting solution to the Bush War. Nkomo and Mugabe attended the conference under the Patriotic Front banner. The conference was held from September 10 to December 15, 1979, under the chairmanship of Lord Carrington, the British Foreign Secretary. Muzorewa was persuaded to accept fresh elections, to be held in early 1980. In accordance with the final agreement, Muzorewa's government revoked UDI on December 11, 1979 and dissolved itself. As part of a transition to internationally recognized independence, the country once again became the British colony of Southern Rhodesia pending elections. The parliamentary elections took place at the end of February 1980, after a campaign filled with much intimidation by Mugabe's ZANU. The British government briefly considered disqualifying ZANU from participating in the elections for flagrant violation of the Lancaster House Agreement, but in the end did nothing. On March 4, 1980, the elections resulted in a majority for Mugabe and ZANU. The UANC won only 3 out of 80 seats reserved for Africans in the House of Assembly. Under Mugabe, Zimbabwe-Rhodesia became the Republic of Zimbabwe, or Zimbabwe. Muzorewa stood against Mugabe in the presidential election of 1996, but won less than 5% of the popular vote. Visit to Israel. Muzorewa visited Israel on October 21, 1983. He urged Mugabe to establish diplomatic relations, saying his political policies hurt Zimbabwe's agriculture and technology industries. The Zimbabwean government arrested Muzorewa on November 1 on charges of conspiring against Mugabe for the South African government. 2 days later Mugabe warned Ndabaningi Sithole and Joshua Nkomo against conspiring. Muzorewa then went on a hunger strike, which lasted from 3 to November 11. 2008 presidential election. On June 21, 2007 Muzorewa said citizens, black and white alike, came to his house and asked him to run for president. He said Zimbabwe was bleeding, economically and socially. It is painful to listen to them talk. He asked people to pray that negotiations between ZANU-PF and the MDC, mediated by South African President Thabo Mbeki, would be successful and for Zimbabwe's salvation. Ultimately Muzorewa did not run in the 2008 presidential election. Death. Muzorewa died aged 84 from cancer at his home in Harare on April 8, 2010. The Director of Christian Care, Reverend Forbes Matonga, described Muzorewa's legacy as including his role in the country's transition to independence, the Methodist Church and the founding of Africa University in the eastern Zimbabwean city of Muta. Political commentator John McComb said Muzorewa's legacy in Zimbabwe would be that of a man of peace. See also, List of Bishops of the United Methodist Church, Security Force Auxiliaries. References. External links, Dictionary of African Christian Biography, American Committee on Africa, Election Report, White Farmer Vows to Challenge Muzorewa Farm Grab, Security Force Auxiliaries http, www.themikiwakomps4htm, Obituaries, Bishop Abel Muzorewa The Daily Telegraph Obituary, Abel Muzorewa, African cleric and politician, dies at 85 The New York Times Obituary, Passings, Timothy White, Christopher Cazenove, Bishop Abel Muzorewa, Peter Ramsbotham Los Angeles Times Obituary.